Picture this. Your life changes with the creation of a video game that exceeds all of your expectations. It is a unique video game with quirky characters and a memorably meta story that garners a cult following and is considered one of the best games of the year. It even has one of its characters and music tracks immortalized into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. How do you follow up that success? Do you go bigger and better? Or do you do more of the same? In Toby Fox's case, he decided to go backwards, but not in terms of downgrading or degradation in overall quality. He went backwards in some of the qualities that made Undertale such a memorable video game. He went back to square one, and in doing so, he still created something different and unique. A first step in a road that has no end in sight. Yet. Now the question is this. Is it all for better, or for worse? Deltarune is another bullet hell RPG made by Toby Fox. Development for this game began roughly at the same time that development for Undertale first began. That's one reason that explains why Deltarune is akin to an alternate universe story instead of a sequel. According to Toby Fox, the idea for Deltarune came to him in a dream, back in 2011 and when he was in college. Development for Deltarune began in 2012, with inspiration for many of its characters coming from the unique art style of Canotines, but with little progress made before being abandoned. However, when Undertale was successfully kickstarted, Toby Fox ultimately decided to combine the two, though I imagine that he eventually decided to create Deltarune in much the same way that Orson Scott Card decided to make the Shadow series. After all, what does an artist do after they've created what they or their fans regard as a magnum opus? I would imagine that they are free to create whatever they want with next to no financial worry, especially in the case of an indie developer who created a smash hit. Rather than explaining Deltarune's controls and gameplay in its entirety, I'm simply going to explain what it is that Deltarune does differently to Undertale, and assume that you've played Undertale already, because honestly, both games control quite similarly. Once again, you only really need 7 buttons to play Deltarune. Up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start. Kinda. You just need 4 arrow keys and 3 buttons for selecting, cancelling, and opening the menu. You dodge friendliness pellets, like in Undertale, and attempt to spare your enemies by negotiating with them. But it's now done in a party system akin to the first 6 main Final Fantasy games. You control a party of 3 instead of just 1, meaning that you can have each character attack, each character defend, use their special actions, items, and spare. The big change is a magic point system called TP. What's TP stand for? It stands for Tormenting Potential. Not really, it stands for toilet paper. Just kidding. It actually, honestly stands for Tension Points, and they're ingeniously accumulated by cheating death and narrowly dodging attacks thrown your way. You know you're accumulating TP when you hear a clicking sound when your red heart icon is surrounded by a white heart. Undertale technically has this mechanic when you're brushing up the Tsundere plane or polishing the armor of those budding homosexuals, but it's nowhere near Deltarune's level of necessity. Another thing that Deltarune does differently to Undertale is in its story aspect. It's heavily implied at the beginning of your game and through Susie's first lines that your choices don't matter, and they ultimately don't. There's no pacifist and genocide route in Deltarune. There's no critical change in the story if you decide to attack all of the enemies or spare them. Hell, there's even a boss fight in Deltarune that makes it statistically impossible to do a genocide run. Damn, Milk really does build strong bones. The main change to the ending of the game is the option of saying goodbye to the enemies of Deltarune, or having them want to put your heads on stakes. Both Undertale and Deltarune are made with GameMaker Studio, so the graphics should be virtually similar. How did that Family Guy cutaway go? The one with Disney's Jafar needing glasses?
Number 1, number 2.
About the same. Number 1 might be a tiny bit better.
While the graphics are similar and the gameplay is a marginal improvement to its predecessor, the soundtrack is considerably better in Deltarune than in Undertale, not necessarily in mob memorability, but in its overall composition in comparison to Undertale's soundtrack. Want an example? Listen to Undertale's track titled Once Upon a Time. Now listen to Deltarune's track titled Beginning. The difference between both songs is comparable to a solo performance in a concert. Deltarune possesses far greater quality and instrumental variety in most of its tracks, and certainly more consistency in the musical style. Remember that I said that Undertale couldn't really decide to go with chiptunes or not with its soundtrack? That quote-unquote problem doesn't exist in Deltarune. Also, there's a lot less recycling in Deltarune's soundtrack in comparison to Undertale's soundtrack, though that might be because Deltarune's track list is less than half of Undertale's. And by recycling, I mean that there's a leitmotif, a musical flower from which all petals grow from. For Undertale, it has several, though Once Upon a Time dwarfs all others, and for Deltarune, it has Don't Forget. So is Deltarune's soundtrack better than Undertale's? No, but it clearly sounds more professional. No megalovanias, but plenty to make remixes out of. Deltarune begins with you customizing your avatar for the game. You're given options of being able to choose hairstyles, clothing options, legwear, preferred food tastes, blood type, but it's all discarded as you're told you can't choose who you are in this world. Maybe if you had the options of adding scars, unnatural colors, and comically oversized genitalia? Furries have that shit pegged. Next thing you know, you wake up in your room, a boy named Chris, taking up the right side while the left side belongs to your brother Asriel. I guess he's the favorite, he'll probably go to Harvard, and you'll probably be lucky to make ends meet on Patreon. Your mother, Toriel, the fluffy gilf monster herself, is a teacher at the school you attend. She drives you to school in an appropriate soccer mom van, while the charming underlying motif of Deltarune plays as you notice new and familiar resident monsters of your hometown. Once at school, you attend class, taught by Alphys of all monsters. And rather than teach you about determination or anime, though she's still a lovable weeb if you look at her quotes, she tells you to pick a partner for an assignment. You resist the temptation of killing Birdly in front of the whole class, and almost pick Noelle the reindeer girl, but Susie does her best Kool-Aid Man impression, and basically makes Alphys have you partner up with her. Not exactly for the school assignment, whatever that is, but to get some chalk which has mysteriously disappeared. Upon exiting the classroom, you see Susie swallow some of the missing chalk like a pack of Smarties. Guess that's better than lead paint chips, like the good old days. Upon noticing your presence, Susie threatens to swallow your whole face, but the twisted delinquent monster with a possible vor fetish decides against it, because it would be a shame for Toriel to have to bury her own child. Together, Chris and Susie go to the supply closet to get more chalk, but this closet is apparently the entrance to Narnia, or Wonderland, or something, because the ground disappears from under their feet and they fall into the dark world. Do you think they play Yu-Gi-Oh? Once in this new and mysterious world, Chris awakens as a knight. Trekking further reunites you with Susie, whose costume makes her look like she skinned Barney the dinosaur and stole Bowser's spiked bangles. Shortly after reuniting, a mysterious entity attacks you, forcing you both to run. In your haste, you stumble on a robed figure, a prince of darkness who gives you an exposition dump to the tune of a medieval quest, a legend about Deltarune, of the balance of light and darkness that if broken, would make the earth draw her last breath. 3 heroes, a human, monster, and a prince of the dark, would be fated to restore balance by sealing fountains of power that disrupted this balance and also gives the world you're in its form. The king of this land has taken control of the second fountain that emerged, and the robed prince needs your help to stop him. Susie chooses against this because delinquent, wanting to return to her own world. But before she can leave, the king's son, a spade boy named Lancer, interrupts the budding party of 3 and fights you. But because his plan involves a flaming motorcycle that is actually a tricycle he set on fire to look cool, his plan ends as he retreats for now. Susie chooses to do her own thing because delinquent, leaving you with the Prince of Darkness, who was revealed to be Ralsei. What makes him so dark? Because he's cute as fuck, and would settle his conflicts with cake and compliments. He certainly wins you over as he attempts to have you kill his training dummy, which you hug to death, and even blushes whenever you get close to him. As you make your way to your objective, you and Ralsei become aware of Susie's actions as a neutral party. A cake has been bitten into, I bet it was face cake, and monsters are scattered into a beaten pulp. She does join your party, but you must warn your enemies of her, so that you can have your precious pacifist ending. Eventually, your journey takes you to a checkerboard with chess pieces. It's here that Lancer and your party come up with a name for your group. I went with Shit Squad because it's one of the reasons why the Nintendo Switch version of this game got temporarily pulled from the eShop. It's also here where you fight a crown checker piece that makes Susie realize that she's a lousy hero. So she decides to pair up with Lancer and become a villain instead. Not a serious villain, mind you, more like a kids show villain. And even then, they're not particularly good at that. This leads to hilarious and ultimately half-hearted hijinks, such as coming up with a machine that'll kick your ass. Go with the duck because it's the funniest overall. Having you literally pay for it, having Lancer and Susie chill before constructing it at the last minute, and ultimately destroying it before they fight you in a 2-on-1 battle. Not a Pokemon double battle, but the premise is still the same. Ralsei uses Sing to put the stronger opponent to sleep, while Chris uses Flatter to make Lance stop fighting. It all works, and both Lancer and Susie join your side. The shit squad is back, and with one more buddy. From here, the quartet of quirky characters make their way to the king's castle, Lancer's father's castle, Lancer's father, and Susie says that she'll crush anyone that gets in their way. Anyone. Lancer displays rare grief before fleeing because he understands the situation and reaches the castle before the rest of the fuck squad. As a result, Chris, Ralsei, and Susie are captured and arrested. Ralsei and Chris share a prison cell, and after eating moss and wearing shackles like armor, which Ralsei comically points out, Susie breaks out of her cell across the room. She's guided towards the other two, but not before confronting Lancer, who intentionally had his friends thrown in jail because he doesn't want to see them fight his father and kill each other. At first, Susie warns Lancer to step aside or else she'll kill him, and Susie almost kills Lancer. But at the last moment, she finally shows mercy and becomes the good girl that she should have been from the start. And after reuniting with Chris and Ralsei and taking an elevator ride, she says that she'll listen to Chris and even act in battle. Susie genuinely joins the party, but she comically struggles to flit with enemies. From here, your only real obstacle before getting to the king is the Duke of Puzzles, also known as Rules Card. He's pompous and arrogant, and solving his one-step puzzles rewards you with a hilarious ego check. The only quote-unquote challenge he presents you is the return of King Round, which is basically a successful do-over for Susie's character growth. Rules Card concedes, and you make your way to the top of the castle, where you see Lancer talking to his father, the king. Lancer attempts to convince him that his friends are good. The king literally holds his own son hostage for our heroes, only for it to fail when Lancer stabs his own father in the back. You fight him, and he feigns defeat, which works unfortunately when Ralsei heals him and allows the king to retaliate. Luckily, Lancer comes in with everyone you've been nice to, and successfully usurps the king. Just so you know, if you've been doing a quote-unquote genocide run, the king will just be put to sleep, and the same throng of enemies you fought to get here will want to break in and kick you out. A few quick goodbyes, and one surprise reveal later from Ralsei.
Are you telling me that you are not...
Yeah, I'm not a woman.
White?
Both Chris and Ralsei reach the fountain. It is successfully sealed, and the next thing you know, you both end up in the school's unused classroom.
Shit, I hallucinated all that, didn't I?
As the school day turns to dusk, Susie asks you to go back into the dark world tomorrow, assuming of course it's even possible to go back there before going home. You're left to explore your hometown, leading to humorous conversations with several nostalgic and new characters. And upon returning home to your mother and calling it for the day, this game comes to a close. But not before seeing Chris literally pull his own heart-shaped soul out of his chest and whip out a knife. And the only thing you can do is watch and squirm in your little cage. Compared to Undertale, the main characters of Deltarune are present for most or all of the game instead of in the sidelines until the end. And while Undertale's roster is larger and probably more iconic, Deltarune's roster is smaller and magnified. Let's begin with Chris. According to Deltarune, Chris is a strange kid who's been known to pull a few odd pranks, such as hiding under Noelle's bed like a monster. They also have a peculiar, and delightfully relatable, taste in art. According to Birdly, they're the only human in the game, and just like Frisk and Undertale, your main protagonist is androgynous. Overall, your character never really says a word and basically exists as your avatar. In the Dark World, you're the leader, watching out for Ralsei and Susie. Your relationship with Ralsei is smooth and steady, but with Susie, it's rocky at first because she's a delinquent. But eventually, the Purple Beast complies with your actions and even attempts to protect you against the king. Ralsei is a prince with next to no subjects to rule, a kind and fluffy character who represents pacifism to a fault, with a name that's an anagram for another particular character. He loves warm hugs and would prefer to solve his problems with a friendly conversation and cakes rather than with violence. As a result, he's often ridiculed by Lancer and Susie during their hostile phase. Near the end of the game, his pacifism betrays him as he heals the king. Yes, the king is defeated, but Ralsei learns through Susie that there are always violent people that can't be reasoned with, and sometimes you must fight whether you want to or not. Susie is essentially the opposite of Ralsei, but before entering the dark world with Chris, she's the school delinquent, wearing ragged clothing that may highlight a rough upbringing in her life. That's something that I honestly hope is explored in the future. In the dark world, Susie experiences the most character development out of anyone. She starts off rebellious, disobedient, and malicious, thus forcing her quote-unquote friends to alert the enemy of her actions. Well, when in battle anyway. The fight with K-Round is the tipping point in making her think that she should be a villain instead of a hero, and her growing relationship with Lancer would lead you to believe that her turn from babyface to heel is permanent. But it's also through Lancer that she understands the value of friendship and pacifism. She spares Lancer, listens to Chris, respects Ralsei, saves Chris from the king, and then warmly tells him that she would love to return to the Dark World with him tomorrow. As for Lancer, he's the Sans derivative in Deltarune. He starts off goofy and mischievous for the first half of Deltarune, but it could just be a facade to hide the pain he feels from his terrible father, the king and the main antagonist of the game. Overall, Lancer is impossible to take seriously, even with his quote-unquote threats, and even when Susie joins him. But alongside Susie, he changes for the better and becomes a new king, hopefully one that will change the Dark World for the better. Comparing Deltarune with Undertale at this point seems like a premature conclusion and a mismatch overall. For starters, Deltarune is the first chapter of an episodic series, especially with the cliffhangers left behind in the form of a night that we never know the identity of, or of tomorrow being a new day, and whatever that door opens up to. Not to mention the plausibility of a new antagonist in the form of Chris, or whatever it is that becomes of Chris. I will say this about Deltarune. In comparison to Undertale, it's not exactly high on the replayability factor. With Undertale, you can honestly replay that game several times, even dozens of times, with different choices made as you get different endings, even for something as small as never taking off your bandage. But Deltarune can only really be enjoyed no more than 2 times before getting familiar. On the upside, the game is free on PC and the Nintendo Switch, the platform that I chose to replay Deltarune on for review purposes, and for another reason.
The true and real chaos.
Chevel is the secret boss of Deltarune, a jester who went mad within his prison cell, seeing it as if everyone outside of his little personal bubble of chaos is locked away instead of him. You need 3 keys to open his jail cell, and he'll even force you to open his door if you decide to change your mind at the last minute. He's just scratching the surface of what the Dark World has to offer, but he still offers a healthy challenge with his all-consuming bullet hell attacks. For starters, he speaks during the fight. To prepare for him, you'll need to make sure that you have saved all of your best recovery items. During the fight, you must use hypnosis on him 10 times, or whittle down his health to 0 if that's too difficult for you, because all 3 party members must be conscious for hypnosis. I beat him on my first try. Not even joking. There were some close calls, but I had more precision in avoiding his attacks with a joystick than I did with a keyboard. Wish I had that when I first played this game on PC. Overall, Deltarune is a game that takes a different path from Undertale. It may not be a complete game like Undertale, or its sequel, as a lot of people originally thought it would be, but it is the start of something that has the potential to be truly extraordinary. Only time will tell, but I will say this. It's one thing to give gamers what they want. It's another thing to give them something that they didn't know they wanted or needed.
With the truth, the promise in our hearts. Don't forget it. I'm with you in the dark.
In the new Toy Story 2 video game, you are Buzz Lightyear. Life is good.